Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily, your daily dose of ecological farming insight. It is Wednesday, November 13th, 2024, and today for the daily, I'm going to be joined by Jayne Merner to talk about starting a professional composting business, how we stay hydrated in the summers, and how Jayne manages pests in a compost operation. Jayne runs Earth Care Farm in Rhode Island. She is the host of the Composter podcast, and she is starting a second site for her compost operation in Connecticut. We need more composting operations like Jayne's, so I am hoping to check in with her regularly about this particular project and get some insights on what it takes to start a composting operation like this. So, let's do it. Jayne Merner, welcome to Growers Daily.
Jesse, I'm pumped to be here. Thanks for having me on.
I'm pumped to have you. I'm super excited about that. How are things in Rhode Island?
Things are great. It's been like a super blustery day here today, but it's like leaf season. So that's a very exciting time for a composter. The leaves are falling off the trees today and they're going to be composted. I'm very excited about it.
So what is that? So when that starts happening, are there just like dump trucks showing up?
Yes.
On a daily basis with leaves?
Lots of landscapers and a couple of the towns in the area. And I do encourage people to leave leaves in their garden, but there's just times when there's just so many that come down that you just can't help but have to rake some of them up. And so those get brought here by tractor trailer truckload and dump truckload, and then the neighbors bring them in pickup trucks as well.
Yeah, it's funny. I talked about I have a neighbor whose house just seems to be like the leaf capital of our neighborhood, where just like all the leaves pile on their yard, and basically like if they didn't pick them up, their yard would just go away.
Yep.
And they don't have enough trees for that to make sense, so it's kind of like a funny situation. But it works out for us because they just bring us tons of leaves.
It's so beautiful.
Oh yeah, I mean for us that's just like the dream. Free leaves all day long. Okay, so I thought to start, if you wanted to, I'm curious, and I know that I have a lot of listenership who are curious. And I have a lot of market gardeners who are eager to have more composting operations. So I'm curious, let's start with just like composting operations in general. Like if somebody wants to start a compost operation, where do they start? It's
a long-winded answer to this question because it is very state specific. So I'm in Rhode Island and I'm used to these, regulations here. We're an agricultural composter here. And composting is encouraged on farms here. This beautiful fly here checking me out. But in Connecticut, it's a whole different. I'm just over the line into Connecticut where this new site is that we're starting. And it's a very different process. It's considered a commercial solid waste facility, even though it's the same thing I'm doing here. And it's the same kind of permit process as a landfill would be. So hopefully, if you want to do this, you're in a state that encourages composting and there's agricultural composting. Generally, those rules are they're all a little bit different, but something like if, more than 60% of the material is from your farm to make compost, you can do that on your own property with, following the guidelines, but it's not a very difficult permitting process. Very different if you're a commercial solid waste facility, like I'm falling under that category. Yeah.
Yeah. Are there states that are considerably more difficult to start a composting operation in than others? I'm assuming there are, but like.
Yeah, the ones where the road hasn't been paved. So Connecticut, this will be their first large scale compost operation taking in food scraps. There's some yard material compost operations there. So there's just the path hasn't been forged. So that's a difficult path to go in, where a state like Massachusetts has lots of composters, and Vermont in particular is very encouraging of compost facilities as well. And so it's a little bit of an easier pathway. Still, there's a lot of hurdles, but and those hurdles, so like the next part would be finding a piece of land. Like if you already have a farm, that's wonderful. Thinking about your neighbors, wind direction, truck traffic, if that's going to be a problem. Those are all big factors in setting one up. And then also thinking, how close are you to inputs? So New England's beautiful with all these leaves that fall. And then thinking about what other resources, what would be a good nitrogen source in your area? Are there farms with manure? Does your farm have manure? We're tapping into the zoo here. We get all the manure and bedding from the zoo. Maybe there's something like that in your area. Or think outside the box. Like we get seaweed from beach cleanups and lots of fish from fish processing facilities. I'm hoping to get, food scraps from places like the big casinos in Connecticut from, it's like, where can we get these great inputs that would be considered waste? So thinking about that, what's in your area? And moisture, how often are you going to have to water? I hadn't thought about that being in Rhode Island where we have pretty plentiful rain. Those, more arid areas are trickier spots to make compost in. So lots to think about, but also it boils down to pretty simple stuff besides the permitting,
Yeah. I mean, that's been one thing that I've heard from other composters is that going through the permitting process can be difficult. I think it does seem, and maybe you can correct me if I'm wrong on this, that people who start with the site first often seem to have more trouble with the permitting than people that start really examining the permitting and then finding a spot that sort of fits that. Does that ring true, or do you think there's exceptions to that?
I don't know. This is my first experience because, my dad started this compost operation back in the 70s before there was any permitting or regulations. Like composting wasn't like a thing. So it wasn't the same process for him. It was in the 90s, there started to be wording for regulations, and he helped to draft that with the state. So that was a very simple process. We have permit number 1 here. This is a whole different thing. It's a whole different thing. But I think you're probably right. Except for me, I almost think finding the right site is harder than working through. Like, it might take me longer. I will get through this permit process in Connecticut. It might take me longer. But almost everywhere right now in the U.S., it's starting to be a priority for all those, the DEMs and the DEPs or whatever it's called in your area, to get food scraps out of the landfill. They're realizing the big problem with that. So even though this process has been very challenging for me, I'm 7 months in. I've gotten 1 of my 5 permits that I need, and they're consecutive. So I'm probably another year away, but I will get it.
Wow.
Every single agency is supportive of the process. Everyone's afraid to put their stamp on it, like afraid to get in trouble a little bit because it's paving the road, and no one wants to get in trouble. But I'm dealing with I almost want to read you this. So I had
Okay. Do it. Sure.
I had a question that I sent because I don't have a big team. I think this is meant for like large corporations also to work through.
Okay.
And we have a small farm team, really. You can imagine there's 5 of us really here. And so it's really me and one other person really working on the permitting. And so one of the things was I needed a financial assurance for the state. And I just wanted to know what that was. I thought maybe it was like a letter from my accountant saying, we have the money to make this happen. So I asked the person in charge of the permit application at DEEP. And the answer was, I said, what's a financial assurance? And he said, many facilities use the combination of a funded trust. In this case, the department will need the trust agreement in concert with the bond, Section 22A-209 of the Regulations of Connecticut State Agencies, Title 40 of the Code of Federal Regulations, and it goes on for another 2 paragraphs like that, Jesse.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and so I realized, I don't know if I understand English after hearing the answer. And I'm in over my head. But I'm just going to break it down sentence by sentence, look up those different codes, and maybe that will tell me what a financial assurance is. It wasn't as simple as I thought. But this is one of many things like that.
Yeah. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, on the one hand, I guess, I understand there needs to be some amount of regulation to prevent pollution,
100%.
to prevent air pollution. I imagine
Runoff,
a lot of people
run
off all those things. But it also sounds like there isn't a lot of infrastructure in support of these, sort of composting operations. Like you said, it has to have already kind of been done in that state to really get it over the line with any sort of efficiency.
Yep.
And I think that's really fascinating.
I'm learning
kind of,
so much.
Yeah, I imagine. Future generations will really appreciate that information. But unfortunately, you have to live through it. In one question I think I had, and maybe we can finish this segment with this, is just I am always, like you mentioned, starting one of these on a farm. Mm-hmm. And I know there are farms that have excess materials that maybe they could use. I have a friend who has like thousands of pounds of, hog manure because he has a hog operation, like a very conventional farmer at one point, and he started this hog operation. Now he's not a conventional farmer, but he still has the hog operation because of the way the contracts work. And anyway, he's one of those situations that probably in the right world would allow a composting business onto his property in theory. So like, I'm just wondering, is it like, how much room is there for composting operations to be started on farms, or are there more complications with that than maybe I realize?
I hadn't thought about it in that way. Usually it's like the farmer, that's how my dad did it, was like the farmer making compost. Really, it was meant originally for his own fields to make the fields better. And then it just started to kind of grow a little bit. And then he could sell some. And now it's a good part of it is sold. So I hadn't thought about it as a outside composter coming into a farm. I'm not sure how that works exactly, but I'm sure there's a way to do it in tandem to benefit both parties. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'd like to see more of that. But
yeah.
I mean, for the moment, we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we're going to get a question from a Patreon member. So BRB. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Johnny's Selected Seeds. When you need proven varieties you can count on and detailed guidance from seeding to harvest, consider Johnny's your trusted growing partner. Their same-day shipping can help keep your planting schedules on track when the unexpected happens. They're here to help you grow good food. Turning to Johnny's means you can plant high-quality, trial-proven varieties with confidence and know that their expert staff is ready to help with first-hand knowledge, because they've grown them themselves. Learn more at johnnyseeds.com. All right, back to the show. All right, Jayne, we always take a question from Patreon members, and I thought this one might be fun for you and I to tackle. This one comes from Patreon member Kathy Yearwood, who asks, hydration and drinks to enhance energy. Kathy says, I would be interested in how you and others rank your favorite beverage for hydration during long summer or long farming days. I tend to limit coffee to 1 cup in the early morning and then make an iced coffee around 3:30 with the leftover coffee. In between is primarily water-based beverages, i.e. lemon juice and water, blackberry juice and water, etc. End quote. So Jayne, what say you? What's your, how do you get through it?
I'm in the same boat as that listener. I have 1 cup of coffee in the morning. I hydrate mostly with water all day. I love a slice of lemon. I love holy basil in my water. And then that afternoon, if I do get that afternoon slump and I need to like push through, I like a cup of mate. That's my go-to.
Oh, yeah, nice.
And I've gotten I'm all into the reusable bottles, but when you're like out and, well, for me, I'm lurking at the compost. My hands are like usually dirty. And then you go to take the lid off and your bottle gets so gross. And there's only so many times I can reuse it, but I don't want to use plastic. I have just found not a paid anything, but the aluminum, they're meant to be one-time use. This one happens to be Poland Spring, but they're aluminum. So I can use it a bunch of times. But then when it actually gets gross where I don't feel like it even gets clean anymore, like the other ones do, I can recycle it. So I like that. But the thing I love about mate, I'm jumping all over the place, but is that you don't get the crash as hard as you do from coffee. It's just like a nice, more even caffeinated beverage if you need that. Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. It's funny you mentioned the thing about your reusable bottles getting so gross, because I wanted a light colored bottle so I wouldn't keep losing it in the field. And so Hannah got me, I don't have it with me, but a really nice water bottle that's white.
Oh yeah.
And that thing gets so gross so fast because I can find it, but it gets rough. But it's funny because my hydration is like a huge issue for me, and it has been for years. I used to go down with dehydration like regularly, like at least once, if not twice a season. And for some people, that's probably like, kind of a headache and they don't feel like energetic. But for me, it's like I can be down for a full week. And so I had to be really conscious for a while of like what I was doing for hydration. And so I did I just have to drink a lot of water. I drink coffee in the morning because I'm up at like 3:30 in the morning every day. So I do that. But then I don't drink any coffee after like 8 a.m. And then I drink water like as much as I can. I also will occasionally make like a electrolyte that would be, I think it's like, usually it's just like a pinch of salt, a pinch of baking soda, and a little bit of blackstrap molasses if I have it. If not, just fresh maple syrup, and then that and kind of like a tea, maybe with some chamomile tea. I think a lot of people use black tea, but I don't want the caffeine usually in the afternoon. So I will do that. And then my other thing that I've become obsessed with and I plan to talk about on the show is watermelon juice. Love that. Like I've never been a watermelon fan, but I will take watermelon and mint and just mix those things together. I have like 20 quarts in our freezer right now that I can thaw, but those have become like absolutely essential for me for hydration during the summer. I don't know how I would survive without those things. And honestly, haven't gone down in a couple of years. So that's good.
Yeah, there's something about the watermelon, and I think lemon does the same thing, where you can feel your like your cells like accepting the water more. There's a point where I feel like water's not even getting into my cells. So I think you're right on with the watermelon. And keeping the mint, the holy basil, it also is like, it flavors the water so nicely. It mixes with mint really well. It mixes with lemon really well. And it's sort of I think it might be a relaxant. So it's a calming, but also energizing and hydrating. So I love that combination. Keeping mint and holy basil by my door when I'm going in and out so I can just pick it. It's really been key.
Yeah, that's fun. I've been planting more fruit trees, perennial fruit trees. And so like a big thing is thinking about like ciders, apple ciders and pear ciders and those sorts of things. We can't grow super great apples or pears here in Kentucky. Pears better than apples. But just having more juices around that I can mix with things like ginger and different herbs for those sort of hydration moments, I think will be super cool in the future. But it'll be like, I'll report back in like 10 years when those things are when those things are ready to produce for me a little more. So, but anyway, that's a great question. Thank you, Kathy. We appreciate the question. Keep them coming, Patreon members. We really appreciate the support and all the questions you all have coming in. When we come back, we'll get one more composting operation question. So be right back. Today's episode of Growers Daily is brought to you by Farmhand. I don't know about you, but I got into farming to be in the field growing food for my community, not creating elaborate pack lists, not writing newsletters or responding to emails, not designing and maintaining web stores, and etc. And I especially don't enjoy doing those things after an already full and fulfilling day of growing food. Actually, if I spent less time on my phone and behind the computer, that would be great. If only there were a solution for that. Enter Farmhand. Farmhand is the only all-in-one virtual assistant built by and for farmers. With one single platform, Farmhand enables you to offload your administrative tasks, send and manage communications, and sell more to your customers. Farmhand saves growers an average of 6 hours of administrative load each week. That's 6 hours so you can get back into the field, spend more time with friends or family, or have a life outside of the farm, which is actually a thing. Think about it. What would you do with an extra 6 hours a week? Sign up for a free trial with the link in the show notes, because now is the best time to dial in those systems for the next growing season. Follow the Farmhand link in the show notes to learn more. All right, back to the show. All right, so Jayne, I know one of the things I don't really hear that much about when it comes to composting operations, especially larger scale ones, is pest management. And I'm curious, do composting operations on your scale have much in the way of pests, and what does that look like? And what would I mean, maybe there's some I'm not even thinking of.
Yes, for sure. We do have pests, and it's something to think about a lot. I think at this scale, a lot of composters' pests ends up being gulls. That's a big one. Like if you think of that when you go to a landfill, I don't know if it happens where you are, but we're on the coast. But
Yeah, we don't have
no.
we don't have many. Every once in a while, I'll see a seagull, and I know it's lost.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Okay. So we have gulls here. There's seagulls. For some reason, seagull is like not the proper term. It's
Oh,
gulls. My own ornithologist professor would be so scolding if I said seagull. So it's a gull. They're gulls. And what they just come here in the winter time because in the summertime they're at the beach. And they're looking for the food scraps that come in and the fish scraps. And so I think almost for all the pests, there's other pests too, but there's a couple of tactics. If you make sure that you never have food scraps showing on the outside of the pile. So as soon as we get a load of food scraps, it's immediately covered with carbon, mixed, and then put away and then topped with more carbon. People call it a biofilter, but it's just more like leaves and wood chips on top. So it's always covered. That's going to prevent rodents, gulls, coyotes, crows, ravens. These are the things that like come up. Probably bears. I haven't had experience with bears, but I have talked to composters that that's a big concern. If bears are really a concern, they're going to dig in there. So you do need a fence in those areas. But for us, the main thing that we're thinking about is what is going to bring balance to that. So for gulls, we were like, okay, there's very few pests that can, or predators for gulls, but eagles are a predator of gulls. So, and some hawks, some of the bigger hawks. So we leave standing dead trees around the operation, around the farm, so that that's what those big, accipiters, the birds, the falcons, the hawks really like to come and land on so they can see. And so it looks almost looks like an eyesore keeping some standing dead trees, but they're very intentional. And you really do see those like hawks and eagles come in, land on there. And then it's a really amazing experience to watch an eagle come in and swoop down and take a gull. And then it does bring balance to that. It's the same thing with rodents. That's a really big concern for compost operators. And just making a habitat that rodents don't want to be in. So by turning regularly, that's disrupting their habitat, making sure there's no food scraps on the anywhere on the outside of the pile so they're not attracted to it. Encouraging like other life forms, like those hawks are going to do the same thing, take care of those rodents. So I really like the big bird life around the farm. Just thinking about what's their predator, what's going to bring them in, and just having people around a lot also discourages rodents. So that's that one. Flies are another concern. Challenging. It's at every farm really that has horses and cows and things like that as well. Making sure you don't have standing puddles of water around, so they're not breeding. Making sure there's not food scraps and manure out and exposed. It's all the same answers. And turning those piles so you're not having, if a fly does get in there and land and lay eggs, if you're turning it, there's not a chance for the larvae to hatch. I don't know. I just like plant habitat for birds. It's been incredibly effective to have hedgerows of elderberry and willow and the little scrubby pines and things around for birds to have nests in, and lots of food for them as well. Thinking about plants that have seeds to attract the birds to bring the population of flies down. So I don't know. That's my very long-winded answer again about using nature to bring balance to nature and bring that harmony.
I love that. I mean, that the same sort of recommendations would go for any garden too, right? Just having that ecological habitat around for pest management and, especially things like rodents, which are a lot harder to there are certain things that, if a plant is really healthy, it can fend off certain pests, but it's not going to fend off deer or mice. Those are things that are much more complicated to remedy unless you have this sort of ecological balance.
Yeah, it takes thought and just tapping into nature's wisdom already, and it's right there.
What about microbiological pests or anything? Like, are there things that, is that ever a concern for you? Are there
Sure.
fungi that you would be concerned with, or, that sort of stuff?
Not so much fungi, but like I'd be concerned about E. coli or salmonella, something like that. And that's just, it's a little tricky, but it's not so hard at the beginning to get the pile hot enough to sterilize any weed seed, and plant pathogens really, and also the E. coli and the salmonella. It's a little tricky at the end, like a bird. You're encouraging all these birds to come in, but they also like can. There's their manure can, just like in the garden, get on leaves of things, and that's very problematic. But not so much in the compost world. But for us, we do have to test the final mature compost for salmonella and E. coli, and make sure it's safe. Generally, if you go through those first 3 months of those thermophilic temperatures of everything, I'm going to explain that actually a little bit more, how that happens. I know a lot of your listeners understand, but a lot of people assume there's some sort of heating process that we're doing to our compost, and that's not the case. We're just encouraging the life to be thriving so much that through its just metabolically, as it moves around and digests and procreates, it naturally gets so hot, those little thermophilic bacteria, that they heat up the pile to a degree that kills off the dangerous microorganisms. So the coolest thing.
Yeah, that really is cool. It's like a giant dance party where, like, the bad guys don't survive it.
Totally. There's a dance fight and the bad guys are out.
I like it's a dance battle. That's better.
Yeah.
I like that. Yeah.
100%. So I don't know. I love that part. And, but I'm sure there could be some sort of fungi or something that's sapping life out of plants, but I haven't dealt with that. That hasn't come up, but that's a really interesting concept to think about.
Yeah,
like spores, how do you prevent that from blowing in? Really?
Or I imagine, I guess it's the same thing. Like I imagined, isn't there a sort of gray rot or something I've heard about in the middle of a compost pile? Maybe if it gets too dry, or like, is that sort of a thing?
Yeah. Again, it's not something I've seen or experienced, but I'm sure that could happen. But compost is so forgiving. So I imagine even if you were to mix that back up and you've got some kind of gray mold or something, and you can get it to heat up again, you're actually going to be fine on the other end. Get enough moisture in there. It's more forgiving than a lettuce plant that is a little weakened and other things come in. You have more time also to solve it. In that realm. Yeah. Experiencing both. Yeah. Experiencing the challenges of fungal life with greens is very different than in a compost pile.
Yeah, sure. I mean, it's much more complicated on our end in that way, especially when it comes to things like E. coli and food pathogens. Those are, obviously things we have to take extremely seriously, because people are often just eating our produce raw, like in the way that they're not necessarily with compost.
Yeah, they're not eating it raw, but you still don't want to have that in there because that can splash up on leaves, and it's still something to take very seriously. Just it's a little easier to work with, for sure.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I mean, as frustrating as the compost regulations can be, it makes sense in the way that you have to regulate. You have to put some regulation there so that you're not in that situation where you have, like you said, like you've mentioned, salmonella and these other, pathogens that could be splashing onto plants, because when you're using it as compost, you can put it down and then pretty much immediately harvest if it's NOP compliant compost, if it's certified organic compost. So if it does contain those pathogens, then, that could be, for certain growers, it could be an issue.
Super dangerous. Yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's if it's truly composted, it's not going to have those issues at the end. It's very forgiving.
Totally.
Yeah.
Well, Jayne Merner, it has been such a pleasure. It is always so fun to talk to you. Thank you for coming and hanging out with me for a little bit.
I love it.
And where can people follow your work?
Mostly through Instagram seems to be a good spot. earthcarefarm_RI, or we have a YouTube channel as well. We post like once a month. It's Earth Care Farm. I think
Awesome.
that's all it is. But yeah, I can put a link in.
Yeah, we'll definitely put links in the show notes for
It's
sure.
always good to talk to you too, Jesse.
Well, great. It's been a pleasure. All right. If you enjoyed that episode, we will put links in the show notes for ways in which you can follow Jayne. We have also done some videos with Jayne and her father. They're at Earth Care, so you can watch those at the YouTube channel, and we'll put the links for that as well. The Composter podcast, you can get that wherever you get podcasts. We need more composters. So yeah. Reminder that I will be in Evansville, Indiana Saturday, so come out and see me at that event if you're in the area. The link is in the show notes. Also, one of the biggest ways you can support our show is just by sharing this with friends and letting people know that you're listening to it and enjoying it, if you're listening to it and enjoying it. Another awesome way to support our work is to become a Patreon member at patreon.com/no-till-growers, where at a certain level, or if you just bump up from one level to another, or if you just sign up in the month of November at all, you get a shout out in the show. So big shout outs today to, let's see what we got. Chris Esposito and Joe Naaman Sessions duo. This one, maybe it's got kind of like a Starsky and Hutch sort of thing, but Esposito and Naaman Sessions. Chris and Joe, the Chris and Joe show, like good cop, bad cop, but like live action. I think it's pretty fun. Gets good reviews. Lots of people really enjoy it. It's got a great theme song. Chris and Joe, you know that? It's great. It's awesome. Anyway, huge shout out to whoever supports us in whatever way that you can. Thanks for listening or watching. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye.